Welcome to the Quotive Corner. Today's quote was written in 1988, and I want you to think about that for a moment before we get into it, because the year matters. What Isaac Asimov was describing then has only accelerated in the decades since. If anything, the gap he named has gotten wider. The saddest aspect of life right now is that science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom. That's Isaac Asimov, biochemist, prolific author, and one of the most imaginative and intellectually rigorous minds of the 20th century. He published over 500 books across science fiction, popular science, history, and literary criticism. He wrote Foundation. He wrote I, Robot. He spent decades thinking carefully and publicly about where the relationship between humanity and technology was headed, and what it would cost us when we got there. This line appeared as the epigraph to the Science and Society section of Isaac Asimov's Book of Science and Nature Quotations, published in 1988. So, the claim. The first thing worth doing is pulling the two key words apart, because they're not the same thing, and Asimov knew exactly what he was doing by putting them in contrast. Knowledge is the accumulation of information, facts, and capabilities. It answers questions like, what is this? How does it work? What can we do with it? Knowledge is what science produces, systematically, incrementally, with remarkable speed. The rate at which human knowledge has expanded over the last 2 centuries is genuinely without precedent in history. We have decoded the structure of DNA, split the atom, mapped the human genome, developed vaccines that eliminated diseases that killed millions, built machines that can perform computations in nanoseconds, and are now building systems capable of generating language, images, and reasoning that were once considered exclusively human. The knowledge accumulation engine is running at full speed. It has never run faster. Wisdom is something different. Wisdom is the capacity to use knowledge well, to understand its implications, its limits, its potential for harm, and its proper place in human life. Wisdom asks not just what can we do, but what should we do, not just what is possible, but what is wise. It's slower than knowledge by nature because it requires not just information, but judgment. And judgment develops through experience, reflection, moral reasoning, and the hard-won understanding of what actually matters and why. You cannot run wisdom through a machine. You cannot synthesize it in a lab. It doesn't compound at an exponential rate. It accumulates, when it does, through exactly the kind of slow, examined living that most of the forces shaping modern life are actively working against. That asymmetry is what Asimov is naming as sad. Not science itself. He was a scientist and loved science deeply. Not knowledge. He spent his entire career spreading it as widely as he could. What he's naming as sad is the gap, the growing distance between what we can do and what we're wise enough to do well. In 1988, when he wrote this, the most pressing examples were nuclear weapons and environmental degradation, capabilities humanity had developed faster than the geopolitical and ethical wisdom to govern them. The Cold War was still a live concern. The ozone layer was depleting. The planet was warming, and the science was already clear, even if the political response was not. We had the knowledge. We lacked the collective wisdom to act on it proportionally. Fast forward to today, and the examples have multiplied. Artificial intelligence systems are being deployed at scale before anyone has resolved the fundamental questions of how they should be governed, what their failure modes actually are, or what they will do to the economies, relationships, and cognitive habits of the people who use them. Social media platforms built on behavioral psychology and engagement optimization were deployed to billions of people before anyone seriously asked what sustained exposure to algorithmically curated outrage would do to democratic discourse or mental health. Genetic engineering tools now exist that could be used to eliminate inherited diseases or to redesign human beings in ways whose long-term consequences nobody can reliably predict. In every case, the knowledge arrived first. The wisdom is still catching up, if it's catching up at all. The question Asimov is really asking, the one underneath the sadness, is whether the gap is closable. Whether wisdom can be developed fast enough and distributed widely enough to govern the capabilities that knowledge keeps producing. It's not an idle question. It's arguably the central question of the current era. And here's where the episode connects to something larger than any individual. Because wisdom, in the sense Asimov means it, isn't something governments produce or corporations develop or scientists generate as a byproduct of research. It's something that individuals cultivate, slowly, through careful thinking, honest reflection, and the willingness to ask the harder questions that knowledge alone doesn't answer. The aggregate of that individual cultivation is what determines whether a society is wise enough to govern its own capabilities. Which means the work isn't abstract. It starts with how you engage with the knowledge available to you, whether you treat it as something to accumulate and perform, or something to actually integrate and act on wisely. It starts with whether you're asking the second-order questions. Not just what can I do with this, but what should I do with it? Not just what does this make possible, but what does it make likely? And is that something worth wanting? Maimonides warned us centuries ago not to take something as proof simply because it is written. Asimov is describing what happens at civilizational scale when that warning goes unheeded, when the ability to write things, to do things, to build things outpaces the judgment to evaluate them. The pen moved faster than the wisdom, and now the whole technological apparatus moves faster than any single human being, community, or institution can fully assess. Now, the honest counterpoint, because this show doesn't skip it. The framing of a gap between knowledge and wisdom can become a counsel for paralysis, an argument that we should slow down all scientific and technological development until wisdom catches up. That's not a realistic or entirely coherent position, and Asimov, who loved science, wasn't making it. The knowledge engine cannot simply be switched off, and attempting to do so tends to produce its own harms. The practical question isn't how to slow knowledge, but how to accelerate wisdom, how to build the individual and institutional judgment to govern what the knowledge engine keeps producing. That acceleration of wisdom doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't happen through more information, more data, or more sophisticated technology. It happens through the things that have always produced wisdom: reflection, honest examination of consequences, learning from what went wrong, and the sustained moral seriousness about what we actually owe each other and the world we're building. Asimov named the gap in 1988. The gap is still there. The question of what to do about it is still ours. Thanks for spending a few minutes here at the Quotive Corner. If this one made you think about the difference between what you know and what you're actually doing wisely with it, that's exactly where Asimov would want the conversation to go. And consider this: wisdom isn't in the quote, it's in the reflection. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.